This week was nothing short of big controversy again in our politics with the concept of court packing. And I wanted to bring Jen in. She's a history major, my law partner here at Tyler and Bursch, and instrumental in our work at Advocates for Faith and Freedom. And court packing. So, what is it?
Just put more than 9 justices on the court. You know, since 1869, we've had the same amount, same number. That's when Congress put 9 on the court, and it's been the same ever since. Roosevelt tried to change it, and that's when it started getting called court packing.
1937, roughly. He tried to pass a law that would change the amount of justices from 9 all the way up to 15.
Yeah.
And it was because he didn't like the fact that the Supreme Court at the time had been overturning his New Deal legislation.
And that's really why we call it court packing. There's really no reason. It's just packing the court to get the court to rule the way that you want it to rule versus just allowing the process to take place and truly having the checks and balances that the Supreme Court is intended for.
Let's go back to the very beginning. In 1787, we have the establishment of the U.S. Supreme Court, effectively through Article 3 of the Constitution, right?
Right.
And Article 3 is written, it's very vague. It doesn't identify how many Supreme Court justices are required, right?
Right. It establishes the Supreme Court itself, and then it establishes lower courts that Congress can identify.
So as a result, Congress in 1789, soon after it was established, the Judiciary Act of 1789, established 6 justices for the U.S. Supreme Court. And it was established by Congress, which effectively means Congress has the ability to change that into the future, which it did, as you stated, in 1869, in the Judiciary Act of 1869, where they changed it from the original 6 to 9.
Right after the Civil War. There were some changes in between there, 1789 to 1869. I think there were some changes, but yeah.
So, effectively, and I challenge you, I haven't seen any changes from the 6 to the 9. There was actually an attempt earlier than 1869. I think it was in 1866. There was some efforts to change it based upon I think maybe it was going to go up to 10, and it was going to be upon the death of one of the first to pass away. They would add another one. Something happened where basically it didn't go through, and really the only 2 times where there has been a change in the number of justices was in 1869 when it went from 6 to 9. So that was the only time there was actually a change, as I understand it.
You know what? Honestly, I haven't gone back and looked at that lately.
Okay.
I thought that there would have been more, but
yeah, in that, and I'm talking when there was an actual change in the court itself. So there had been some legislation that attempted to make some changes. Regardless of that fact, since 1869, it's been the same.
Correct.
Let's talk about the legality of changing the number of justices today. Is there anything legally that would prevent the number of justices being changed from 9 to 15 as this present legislation that is in front of us that just came out this week by the progressive Democrat wing of their party? Is there anything that would actually prevent that legally or constitutionally?
Not that I know of, no.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of moral and ethical, and to me it just undercuts and undermines the whole structure of our government, because it was intended to be a checks and balances with 3 different branches doing different things. And really what it does is it creates another political mechanism on the Supreme Court, and it's not supposed to be like that. That's really why there was so much kickback on Roosevelt when he tried to do it. That's not what the court is intended to do. It's not the purpose behind it, and it really changes the structure of it. So that's why you're getting so much kickback.
Let's go back to 1787 when Congress was negotiating and establishing our form of government. Separation of powers was an important thing. And it was actually, according to some, John Adams and other founding fathers, that there was a biblical basis actually behind this concept of separation of powers. Jeremiah 17:9 says the heart of man is deceitful and wicked. And there's wall builders. David Barton wrote an article that I read, where I get a lot of my information based on, kind of from a historical perspective. And he wrote how Jeremiah 17:9 had an impact and how they came up with a separation of powers because of the fact that man's heart is deceitful and wicked, ultimately. Yeah. Even Joe Biden said years ago, when he was speaking rather eloquently, he said that, absolute power corrupts absolutely, which he quoted, and he was there speaking against this concept of court packing. Yeah. And he said he thought it was a bad idea. And that all comes from this concept of separation of powers. Now, you're a history major and you've studied a lot of this. You think that's accurate in analysis of being able to say why we have separation of powers?
I do. And it's interesting. I saw that clip of Joe Biden, and he does say it very well. He explains it very well. He explains what the problem is very well. He's just obviously changed his mind at this point.
So the idea behind the separation of powers is that there's three branches of government. And if one branch of government it becomes wicked in and of itself, you'd have two other branches of government who could overturn it.
Yep, and they all have a different purpose. They're supposed to. The executive branch has its purpose, the legislative branch has its purpose, and the Supreme Court, the judiciary branch, has its purpose to just define what the laws are and to determine whether they're constitutional. And that's what's so interesting about what's happening. Biden, even as you hear him speak now, he's really talking about the political forces behind the court and whether it's conservative or liberal. And of course those things matter. We all know that. But it's interesting to listen to him talk, because even as he talks, it really undermines the separation of powers and the purposes behind each of those branches.
1803, Marbury versus Madison. And that was a defining moment for the U.S. Supreme Court. We all studied in law school, and it's this period of time when the court says, look, we have authority to over the Constitution, to interpret the Constitution, and we have the authority of review over Congress as well, not just over the executive branch, but over Congress. And so it really helped to some degree, some would say, strengthen the three-legged stool of the separation of powers. Others might say it actually created greater power in the Supreme Court. But either way, the reality of it is that the Supreme Court now is one of the most powerful institutions, and they have the ability to declare acts of the president unconstitutional and acts of Congress unconstitutional. And where we sit at today is that what happens if today the presidency is controlled by the Democrats, Congress is effectively controlled by the Democrats. What do the Democrats want now is they want to be able to control the Supreme Court. So you really wind up with a complete lack of checks and balances under the separation of powers doctrine.
Yep.
So what do you think, if it actually happened, what do you think that would do to our republic?
I mean, you just see a massive swing and an undermining of the separation of powers. To me, though, what's interesting about it is I think you see that in the voters. I think the voters would swing the opposite direction and address that effectively in the next election. I don't think the majority of Americans want things to be so extreme on either side or the other, and that's really what you're talking about. The Democrats are trying to get to the point that they can control all three branches in the way that they want to, so there are no checks and balances and there's no structure. And I think you'll see it'll change the republic. It'll change the way that we view the court, and I think even the other two branches. But I think ultimately it'll be a lesson in why the structure is so important, and it'll show us that, which I think would be interesting to watch long term.
So my understanding, I've heard some news reports that Justice Breyer came out and spoke out against court packing.
Yeah.
Right. And that's interesting because Justice Breyer is liberal and on the left side of the court. Yeah. Right. Yeah. He's often on the losing side of the court today. And one of the things I think that that I value in judges is intellectual honesty.
I do too.
And you have other reports of Senator Manchin. I remember seeing him speak out against the possibility of court packing. That prior to the election, he said, "I would vote against that." And so it seems like they've got no chance in the Senate of being able to pass this.
Yeah, I think, and I've said that all along. That would be shocking, but partially it would be shocking because, to your point earlier, how fundamentally it would change our structure and our government would be astronomical. It's really almost impossible to envision that happening. So I think that those who are intellectually honest, and I think there are enough senators to do that, to say that's too far, too much.
And even in Congress, the radical Pelosi, she herself said that she was in favor of this commission that President Biden just recently announced and established. 30, how many people did he have? 36 quote unquote scholars were to be appointed to evaluate the Supreme Court. Now, was he doing that merely as an olive branch to the progressives in his party, or was he doing it because he really wants to change something? I don't know. Do you have any thoughts?
I think he wants to change something, is my guess. I think he wants to move quickly and affect a lot of change and work towards his agenda, and the Supreme Court is blocking that.
Yeah. I'm concerned that the progressives in his administration are really the ones who are pushing this. And, unfortunately, good old Joe, I'm concerned that he doesn't know what's going on, really, and they're pushing him in this arena. I don't know that he is that progressive himself, that he would want to do that if he had his full faculties. I'm not saying he doesn't, but I don't know that he does.
I don't know. At the end of the day, I don't know that it's not really going to make a difference whether he's clearly allowing it to take place. Right. So I think that's what's significant about it.
So the good news, though, I think, is that at least immediately, it looks like this bill is somewhat dead on arrival from some of the political reporting that's come out. But I'm not so sure that a year or two from now that it's not something that actually comes back after this commission comes out. And I wouldn't be surprised if this commission does come out and make some recommendation that the number of justices be changed to add more justices.
You know what? I almost hope that they do. As a Republican, I almost hope that they come out and they recommend that, and it happens before the next election in a couple years, and that it swings the Congress. I hope that it wakes people up to understand how radical what is happening right now is, and how progressive some aspects of the Biden administration are. I'm hoping that that's a wake-up call.
And ultimately what this is this goes right back to what Joe Biden said, and relates to what he said, in that it would give the Democrats absolute power over our republic. And absolute power absolutely corrupts.
And it's not even that it's just the Democrats. To me, any group, any political ideology that is able to control to that extent and is bad. There should be checks and balances. That's how it was created. Whether it's Democrats, Republican, it almost doesn't matter to me. I think that there's an important aspect of how the experiment that was created within this country, that's how we've made it so far and balanced each other and kind of swung back and forth, and that swing and that balance in the middle that was sought is significant. And I think it's what makes us who we are as Americans, and what the political experiment that we all saw here take place in the 1700s and still exists today. That's why it's so important.
I agree, and I really think the foundation of that is it's got to be intellectual honesty. And I think that's something where is lacking in the leadership today. It's that intellectual honesty that recognizes that just because it might be good for me today doesn't mean it's going to be good for me tomorrow when the Republicans are in charge.
And it's lacking because you can see, fortunately, we have all these clips of Biden from years ago telling what he thought about it back then. And now that he has the power, that is corruption. That's how power corrupts. Something that you know to be true when you don't have that power and you can't control that. When you're sitting in that position to see such a dramatic shift about something so significant, that is the definition of power corrupting.
Yeah. And that's why our founding fathers looked at Jeremiah 17:9 and recognized the heart of man. And well, let's pray for our country and pray for the failure of this proposed expansion of the U.S. Supreme Court. Thank you for joining us. Thanks, Jen.
Thanks.